Hello, everybody. Move this real quick. This is our case study, Module 9 for EDL 855. This is Luke Reardon. So to summarize the case and establish the facts should be Section 1. Richard Inman, I just want to go through, I kind of like to break it down. I like to talk about the people, then the scenario, and then we'll go on from there. So as far as the people go, Richard Inman, he's a first-year assistant principal out of Rocket Junior High. I made sure I put in there and emphasize on first year. He grew up on the south side of the town. Building relationships is important to him, from what you can tell from his relationship trying to build with James. James is a 15-year-old junior high boy. He is just a sort of paint an image about him. He's a tattooed, muscular, and leader of the south side kids. Fights constantly, but hasn't for a month, which is a record for him that I pointed out. David Ramos is a 13-year-old honor student, and he plays the trombone. James' mother is also involved. You can tell she's kind of hostile. She's been through this sort of thing before with James. David's mother, you can tell he's angry at the school for what's going on, did not understand or does not know of the school policy regarding the weapons that his son was holding. Other people involved are the resource officer and the director of the student education. So again, summarizing. So as of right now, Richard is building a relationship with James through basketball and seems to be getting through to him. By the ways that they pointed out that he has not fought a lot, and he's the leader of that group from the south side. And they seem to be intermixing, intertwining with everybody else in the school. So seems to be doing some sort of benefit. Richard calls James to office because of a third tardy. So it's unrelevant. He had a third tardy, so he wants to see what's going on. And when he calls the fifth period teacher, she calls right back, and she says that she witnessed a transaction between James and David and thinks there might be drug-related. Richard does not know David very well. It mentions that very many, except for one sort of passing sort of deal after he did very well at a trombone concert. So that's also important to know. Richard called the resource officer instantly to escort David out of class and bring him to his office. Talked to David and James at the same time in front of the officer. James gave David a pair of brass knuckles to hold on to. James admitted to threatening David if he did not hold on to it. He said he would beat the crap out of him. Richard was excited about this just because of kind of getting through to James to see that there is just to act better in school. And so he was kind of excited about that, but obviously he went downhill. The resource officer had to take them both to jail or to juvenile detention center and charge them for felony possession of a prohibited weapon on school property. That's outside of school. So through school, it's 45 days in disciplinary alternative education program for a zero tolerance board policy. Richard felt like he made a mistake by questioning them both into mostly a mistake because of David. David is a good student who's an honor student, and he plays trombone, and just sort of paint the picture of David as a sort of all-around student. And this would be a DAP, would be disciplinary alternative education program that would hurt a lot of David's reputation and opportunities. After a while, after only a week, David was back in class because he did not fill out the necessary paperwork. And director of secondary education told Richard to fill out paperwork, and if he didn't, then he would have to write an official reprimand on Richard that would go into his personal file. Now, why that's important is simply because it is his first year as assistant principal. When they go into your permanent file, it might hurt his chances of moving up into being an actual principal and to move up into administration. What sort of legal and ethical issues are there? Right now, legal issues, obviously, brass knuckles are considered a weapon. They're going to be used. District school board policy has a zero tolerance policy with weapons on school property, which instantly goes to the 45-day suspension, the DAEP. It led to expulsion and arrest. Richard did not file necessary paperwork that went against district zero tolerance policy, which could hurt Richard. As far as ethics, James forced David to hold the weapon. I want to say that again, just because James forced David to hold the weapon. And David, again, it mentions that David's only 13 years old. You sort of paint him as that good student that doesn't really fall out of line and be threatened by James, who's 15 years old, muscular, tattoo. They paint the picture very well. It would be very hard to do. James tried to do the right thing, and that's why Richard got so excited by admitting it and that he threatened him. Richard should not have approached both students together. Richard's showing favoritism that goes against district policy, showing favoritism towards David just by what little does he know about him. And then David did not approach a teacher after being told to hold the weapon. That is on David. But then again, 2 years difference, younger by a bully in the school. You can see why as a 13-year-old. In one sentence, so basically the assistant principal, Richard Inman, has called in James and David into the office to clarify what sort of transaction has taken place on the grounds of Rocket Junior High. Turns out James has bullied David into holding brass knuckles for him, which he intended to use, thus putting both students into risk of expulsion. So the facts. First, people placed in the program. So the people that are involved here are Richard Inman. He is the assistant principal. James, David Ramos, school resource officer, fifth period teacher, the one who reported the issues, James's mother, David's mother, director of secondary education, who told Richard he needs to do the proper paperwork, and the district school board. I threw in the district school board because later on, I do believe we need to be looking at some certain policies. Where this happened at? So first happened in the hallway by fifth period, which instigated the entire thing. And then they were taken to the assistant principal Richard's office. And then they were taken after that to the juvenile detention center. Program, this happened at junior high, Rocket Junior High. There's approximately around 900 students there, so very large. So it's very, as an assistant principal, you can't really build relationships with everybody, which that seemed to be the category that David fell into. And then this is a public school, so they have to abide by all the state and federal mandates. So the facts are still synthesizing here. Assistant Richard Inman is in his first year and is from the South Side. I said the South Side once again because he's from the South Side. He doesn't want to see anyone else being lost to that. James has a history of bad misconduct. David's reputation as a rule follower. He's above average in academic success. James, fifth period teacher, sees a transaction between James and David and tells Richard. I apologize. Richard questions James and David together. I did not like the fact they did it together. Did not ask them separately to be able to make one or the other seem comfortable. And plus bringing the resource officer on top of that sort of brought in legalities that did not need to take place. James does come clean and says he threatened David if he did not hold onto the brass knuckles for him. The officer arrested them both and took them to the juvenile detention center. Richard filled out proper paperwork for the expulsion process on James and not David. Richard is facing an official reprimand that would be included in his personal file. Once again, because he's an assistant principal, this would hurt him further down the road. Stakeholders that could be impacted: students, staff, administration, board of education, and the families. So the students and staff first, because students could be affected to the sole fact that they would be able to see that there is some leeway that this administration, going down the administration, is allowing. Staff could be affected because that would create a little unruly unrest amongst the students. Administrators, it would hurt their integrity and their overall, I guess, demeanor on how people would look at their decision making and seeing that there is some leeway. Board of Education, because the policies need to be relooked at, and the families, of course. So what we know, Richard has invested interest in the student from the South. James has a history of violence. David is perceived as a good student without any history of violence or misconduct. James admitted to the mistake. David did have the weapon in his possession. We do know that. Richard questioned them both in front of the resource officer. Richard only filled out the proper paperwork for James and ripped up David's. Richard is facing a write-up, and if he does not comply with the zero-tolerance policy and write-up of David. So what are some options or possible consequences? So I'll list the options first and go to the consequences. Option 1, you keep the document ripped up and not fill out the proper documentation needed to comply with the zero tolerance policy by the District Board of Education. I then go to the board to bring everyone up to speed on what has happened and try to make changes from there. Option 2, I fill out the proper documentation that would comply with the zero tolerance policy, then call an emergency board meeting in order to assess the situation. The last option is I fill out the paperwork and do not do a thing and hope David the best. So evaluating here, option 1, this would be using my moral judgment to make a decision that would put my career at risk. I'm an assistant principal, and that could hinder my opportunities to move up in my career. This also hurts the reputation of administration, allowing wiggle room for further misconduct from students. Option 2, some of the repercussions would be that this opinion would help protect myself because I'm following the rules, the liability of the school, so sort of avoid lawsuits, but also avoid, again, student misconduct, things of that nature. It would punish David for a crime he did not want to partake in. It would make him think about approaching authorities in the future. It would rather happen at 13 years old rather than later on in life. This is the safest play for Richard, to not do anything but just allow everything to happen. He may have some angry parents, but he would have the school policy to back him up. This would punish David, a 13-year-old kid who has not had any situations in this past arise from this sort of misconduct. I believe the best option is to go with option 2. It touches on the interests of all stakeholders. It protects everybody. It will help Richard stay safe. It will allow board policy and keep the integrity of the administration among the staff, students, and community. Decision is ethical and legal. Decision-making demonstrates the capacity to evaluate the ethical decision of issues, analyze decisions in terms of established ethical framework. This decision will also cultivate ethical behavior in others because I showed a decision that is ethical, showing and was a part of integrity. So to implement, here's what I'd do. So first, I comply and fill out paperwork on David. He would be suspended as of that moment. But I'd meet with the principal to let him know what happened, inform David's mother on my decision, and educate her on the board policy. I would call a board meeting and work with them on helping out David and work with the stakeholders involved to change the board policy. The things I need to consider. A big one I need to consider is that if I go through with this, it would very largely affect David's life at that time. But then again, he's only 13 years old and in junior high. I do not think it would make a very huge impact. It would make less of an impact to do this then and there than it would if he was in high school. Or I think it would make a bigger impact if I did nothing and just let David off scot-free. I do not feel like he would learn and be able to come forward in the future. And in mine, as well, happen now rather than when he is older. I just said that. So some other things you need to consider is to make these decisions in the future. Whenever there's time for human judgment, then there's always going to be access to human error. It is in our nature. The best thing we can do is to make our policies intact or supporting all stakeholders, especially students, but to make sure that those policies are ongoing and always adapting and always changing to keep up with the times.